I'm Timothy, and this is Last Memories. Today, I'm covering what happens when a live stream on social media accidentally becomes a permanent death record. From a scrapper live streaming as he cuts into the wrong chemical tank, to a supervisor broadcasting online as he flees to safety, only to round a corner straight into an active shooter. It was October 3rd, 2015, about 11 miles outside a small farming town in central Kansas. An old fertilizer and grain processing plant that shut down sometime in the early 90s. Fencing collapsed in on itself, signage too rusted to read, a row of large industrial tanks along the western edge of the property, some tilted, some half sunk into the ground from decades of neglect. Morris Benner was 34, lived alone, and picked up work wherever he could find it, hauling, odd jobs, farm work, and scrapping when nothing else was going on. He'd hit that facility before, 4 or 5 times at least. Copper wire, pipe fittings, whatever was worth pulling. He was comfortable there. That much is clear. That afternoon, he wedged his phone against a broken chunk of concrete, pointed it at his work area, and got a Periscope stream going. He had a small following, regulars who'd tune in when he posted. More like having someone around while he worked than anything else. Plants like this one were built with large sealed steel tanks designed to hold pressure, mostly for fertilizer production. When facilities shut down, a lot of those tanks were simply abandoned in place. And from the outside, there is genuinely nothing that tells you whether a tank is empty or not. It has no smell, it looks identical to one that's been empty for years, and it makes the same sound when you knock on it. Morris spent the first part of the stream doing his usual thing, walking the yard, pulling a solid section of copper conduit from near the eastern building, loading it into his truck. Then he moved toward the tank cluster on the western side, further in than he'd gone on previous visits. He walked the row, tapping the sides with a pipe length, listening. Most of them gave back that flat, hollow ring of empty metal. Then he stopped at the third one from the end, smaller than the rest, end cap fully sealed. He tapped it. The sound was slightly off, not quite the same ring as the others. He tapped it again, shrugged it off, set the phone down on a nearby concrete saddle, and picked up his angle grinder. There were comments coming in during those last couple of minutes, at least 2 or 3 of them, hard to make out clearly in the recovered footage. He never looked at the phone. He positioned himself at the seam, got the grinder going, and leaned in. The steel was thick, but nothing he hadn't dealt with before. Sparks flying, the smell of hot metal filling the air around him. He was about 11 seconds into the cut when everything went wrong. It didn't give him a single second to react. The tank ruptured and the blast threw him. He landed 9 feet back with his chest and arms shredded from the blast. The phone went sideways, pointing at cracked concrete, but the stream stayed live. The cloud thinned out slowly, the tank hissed for a while, and nothing else moved. The comment count kept climbing as the people watching started piecing together what they were actually looking at. The stream cut out around 20 minutes later, most likely from the phone overheating or the connection dropping in that area. A viewer called it in after that. Finding him took a while. He hadn't told anyone where he was going that day. His truck was spotted inside the fence line late that evening. The post-mortem confirmed the tank was a sealed legacy storage vessel, likely used for anhydrous ammonia storage during the facility's operation, still holding residual compressed gas after sitting untouched for over 20 years. The injuries were consistent with the pressure releasing all at once at close range. Fragmentation from the tank wall and the force of the blast itself. Death was instantaneous, ruled accidental, no charges filed. The stream was kept as part of the investigative record. Morris had no next of kin on file. A neighbor helped track down a family member who came to collect his truck, his tools, and the copper he'd already loaded up before he walked to the wrong end of that yard. Something being invisible doesn't make it any less deadly, and that facility proved it. In Ohio, 4 teenagers showed up at a homeless man's and did the unimaginable. It was March 14, 2019, under a highway overpass in a mid-sized Ohio city. tucked along an industrial corridor where nobody really came through at night. Wide, dry, sheltered, the kind of spot that made sense if you had nowhere else to go. Gulliver Dale was 52 years old and had been without stable housing for about 3 years by that point. He rotated between a handful of spots depending on the season. The underpass was his cold weather location because it was dry, protected, and close enough to a convenience store 2 blocks north where he could pick up food when he needed to. People in the surrounding blocks knew him by name and described him the same way every time. Quiet, kept to himself, never caused problems. One neighbor said knowing he was down there at night made her feel like someone was watching the street. That night, he was asleep on a flattened piece of cardboard with a sleeping bag pulled over him when 4 teenage boys arrived on foot sometime after 11 p.m. One of them had Facebook Live running before they even reached the underpass. The stream opened on the group walking the service road, already loud and already performing for whoever was watching. They spotted Gulliver from about 30 feet away and moved toward him with the phone held out in front. What followed next made me feel really bad for this man. They threw a bottle at him, then loose gravel, then a piece of broken concrete, all at a man who was asleep. Gulliver stirred and tried to pull the sleeping bag tighter and move away from them along the wall. They followed him. The comment count on the stream was climbing the entire time, a mix of people laughing and people telling them to stop. Roughly 9 minutes into the stream, one of them produced a small plastic container and poured the contents across the sleeping bag and the cardboard underneath Gulliver while he was still partially wrapped in it and still trying to get to his feet. The phone stayed with him the entire time, and just when I thought it could not get any worse, one of them flicked a lighter. The fire spread across the sleeping bag surface in under 2 seconds. The material was synthetic, and it didn't just burn. It melted, fusing to the back of his clothing as the flames climbed. Gulliver was partially upright by that point, but he couldn't get clear of it fast enough. He moved toward the open end of the underpass. The boys scattered, and the one holding the phone ran without ending the stream. The camera caught pavement and legs and the structure pulling away behind them before the frame went dark. The audio stayed live for another 4 minutes after that, just footsteps and breathing and distant traffic. Gulliver made it out from under the overpass on his own. A worker passing along the freight rail line on the other side of the structure noticed the glow coming from beneath it and called for help. Gulliver was conscious and able to communicate minimally when responders arrived. The burns covered his back, both arms, and the back of his neck and scalp. He was taken to a burn treatment unit that same night and held there for the next 6 days before his condition deteriorated beyond what his body could manage. He died on March 20th. The combination of the burn coverage and the smoke inhalation damage to his airway was too much for a man his age in his physical condition to survive. The phone was found at the scene and the stream was still partially cached. All 4 were tracked down within 72 hours through the footage and registration data. The 3 oldest were prosecuted as adults. The youngest was handled separately through the juvenile system. Gulliver's death was ruled a homicide. Burns and smoke inhalation damage to his airway were listed as the cause. He had no family located during the investigation and was identified through a contact record with a local outreach worker who had known him. There is no record of a formal burial ever being arranged for him. This man deserved so much better than the way he left this world. Nobody, regardless of where they sleep at night, should ever be made to feel like their life is a joke for someone else's entertainment. I hope Gulliver Dale gets some peace wherever he is. On a completely different note, what happened to a man in central Oklahoma had nothing to do with anyone's cruelty, just a storm that changed direction at the worst possible time. It was May 19, 2014, on a flat rural road in central Oklahoma, where a wood frame house sat with open farmland on 3 sides and nothing blocking the view to the southwest for miles. You can see everything coming from out there. The problem is that means the storm can see you too. Caleb Dunmore was 41 years old and had lived on that property for most of his adult life. He grew up in the area, worked as an independent agricultural equipment repairman, and had been living alone on the property for about 2 years after a separation. Tornado season was just part of life out there. He had watched storms pass close before without incident and had no particular reason to treat this one any differently. That evening, a severe weather system was pushing into the county, and Caleb walked out onto his front porch, got Ustream going on his phone, and pointed it at the southwestern sky. The wall cloud was already there when the stream started, low on the horizon and rotating. Viewers came in fast, and the comments split immediately between people telling him to run and people who just wanted to watch. Caleb stepped off the porch into the yard to get a better angle and watched the funnel touch down about 2 miles southwest. From where he was standing, the track looked like it was going to pass just south of him. And for a moment, it really did look that way. That's when the track changed. The funnel shifted, and what had been moving northeast started curving directly toward the property. It was getting wider, and the low rumble that had been sitting in the background of the stream was now loud enough to distort everything. Caleb went quiet and moved back toward the porch. The tornado was less than a mile out at that point, and whether he knew it or not, that walk back to the front door was already too late. He made it inside, and the stream caught about 40 seconds of the interior. A hallway, the sound of the windows under pressure, something breaking toward the back of the house. The roar was overwhelming the microphone completely. Then, the frame jolted, pixelated, and dropped. The signal gone as the storm passed directly over. The phone was never recovered. The tornado passed directly over the property. The roof came off first. Then the upper walls failed without anything holding them together, and by the time the storm moved through, there was almost nothing left standing above the foundation. His body was found the next morning in a field a quarter-mile northeast of the property during a search of the debris path. The same storm system had put down multiple tornadoes across the county that evening, which is why organized search efforts didn't get going until daylight. Someone who had been watching the stream reached out to emergency services that night with Caleb's account details and a general location, and that's what got his property on the priority list for the morning search. The post-mortem documented fractures through the spine and pelvis, both legs broken, and significant trauma across the back and shoulders, consistent with being carried and thrown at high velocity. He was 41 years old. The ruling was accidental death. He had 2 adult kids out of state who came out within a couple of days of being notified. The property was a complete loss, and whatever was left of his belongings was scattered across nearly 3/4 of a mile of debris field. A neighbor helped collect what could still be identified. Of everything that stands out to me about this one, it's that he had seen storms like that before. He just hadn't seen one turn like that before. A tornado doesn't give you much of a choice once it's already made up its mind. The next one had nothing to do with weather or bad luck. Just a man who got his head slammed into a concrete curb outside a bar in Tennessee while a crowd stood around and streamed it live. It was February 11th, 2017, on a 2-lane city street outside a bar in a mid-sized Tennessee city, sometime after 1 a.m. The block was a mixed commercial strip with a few bars, a closed diner, and a parking lot. Streetlights were functional, but spaced far enough apart that the area right in front of the bar entrance sat in partial shadow. There was a concrete curb running the length of the sidewalk with no buffer between it and the street. Not heavily trafficked at that hour, but not empty either. Jefton Drew was 29, worked in warehouse logistics, and lived about 3 miles from the bar. He was there with 2 friends that night, a regular Saturday routine for him. He wasn't the type to start something. That much is clear from everything that came before the confrontation. The argument that pulled him in had started inside the bar earlier that evening over something minor, and by the time both men were outside, it had been going long enough that it was no longer about whatever started it. That is usually how these things go, and they do not always end well. A crowd formed quickly when they spilled out onto the sidewalk. maybe 12 to 15 people creating a loose ring around them. At least 3 people pulled out phones and 2 of them opened Facebook Live before the first punch was thrown. The fight went to the ground fast. Jeffton lost his footing on the curb edge and went down, and the other man was on top of him within seconds. At that point, it was not really a fight anymore. The other man had positional control and used it, driving Jeffton's head repeatedly into the concrete curb beneath him. The stream captured at least 5 distinct impacts in the space of about 15 seconds, and the sound of each one carried clearly enough on the audio that people watching from home could hear it. Some people in the crowd stepped back, some stepped closer for a better angle. A few are visibly uncomfortable in the footage, drifting toward the bar entrance, but not one person physically stepped in. The streams kept running the entire time. After the 5th impact, Jeffton stopped responding. His arms went out, his face turned to the side on the concrete, and he didn't move again. The other man stood up, looked at him for a moment, and walked off down the sidewalk. The crowd thinned out gradually. Some people crouched near Jeffton briefly and stood back up. Some just left. A few of them genuinely seemed to think he was just knocked out cold. He was on that concrete for close to 4 minutes before anyone made a call. By the time a response unit arrived, he was unresponsive. He was transported immediately, but arrived at a treatment facility in a condition that left very little room for intervention. He was put on life support that night, and 2 days later, he was declared brain dead. His family withdrew life support on the 3rd day. What the repeated impacts against that curb did was cause bleeding between his brain and his skull that built up pressure his brain couldn't handle. The injury pattern documented in the post-mortem, multiple impact sites across the back of the skull, ruled out the possibility that this was the result of a single fall. That finding is what determined how the case was charged. The other man was tracked down and taken into custody within 18 hours of the incident. 2 separate Facebook live streams gave investigators a complete visual record from different angles, and there was no dispute about the sequence of events. He was charged with second-degree murder and convicted of voluntary manslaughter, a distinction that reflects the lack of premeditation rather than any disagreement about what he did. Under Tennessee sentencing guidelines that carried a term of several years, Jeffton's 2 friends who were present cooperated fully throughout the investigation. He had a 4-year-old daughter being raised by her mother. 4 years old, that is too young to understand any of this and old enough to feel all of it. His family arranged a private burial and left it at that. And I think after everything, they just wanted it to be over. What happened inside a sold-out arena in Illinois 2 years earlier is harder to place blame on because the people standing right next to her genuinely had no idea she was dying. It was November 7th, 2015, inside a large indoor arena in a mid-sized Illinois city. Sold-out show, general admission floor, somewhere around 11,000 people in a venue with no assigned positions on the floor and no internal barriers between sections of the crowd. Open space that filled in from the stage outward with no way to control how dense it got. A group of 4 people in their mid-20s had seats in the upper tier, stage left, with a clear sightline down to the entire floor below. Taylor Gray was 23 and had come to the show alone after a group ticket purchase fell apart when her friends couldn't make it. She decided to go anyway and arrived early enough to get a spot near the front of the floor, about 30 feet back from the stage barrier. She was 5 feet 2 inches and 118 pounds, and she was standing in one of the densest sections of that floor when the lights went down. The group in the upper section opened Periscope about 20 minutes into the set, mostly pointing it at the stage. The floor below was already packed from that height. You could not pick out individual people. It just looked like one single moving surface. The surge started during the 4th song. It was not a panic. Everyone was just caught up in the moment and moving with it. The floor compressed toward the stage, and from above it looked like a wave, the gaps between people slowly closing up. And from where they were sitting, they had no idea that what looked like excitement from above was something much worse at ground level. The group kept the stream on the stage until one of them noticed something looked off near the barrier area. The people pressed against the metal crowd barrier at the front were not moving freely. Some had their arms raised, not because of the music, but because it was the only direction their bodies could go. The stream started drifting toward that section. Taylor was in the third row from the barrier, the highest pressure zone on the floor. The compression had been building for several minutes and hit a critical point during the fifth song. People near the barrier started trying to climb over it or get the attention of security on the other side. A few got pulled over. The pressure from behind kept coming. She lost consciousness somewhere in that window. The crowd held her upright without even realizing it. The people immediately around her had no idea anything was wrong. Her feet were still on the ground. Her body was still vertical. From the outside, she looked exactly like everyone else standing in that crowd. Little did they know, something was already very wrong. It took 6 minutes before anyone noticed. A security worker spotted her from the barrier, recognized that her head had dropped forward and that she was not responding to anything around her, and pulled her over. She was carried to a side corridor immediately, but by that point, there was not much anyone could do. She was pronounced dead within the hour. The show ran for another 40 minutes after that. The floor never knew. The venue's internal response had been triggered when security workers started pulling people over the barrier, but the production team wasn't informed of the severity until after the fact. No announcement was made, and the show was not stopped. The group in the upper section went home that night thinking they had filmed a concert. The next day, one of them went back through the periscope footage and saw what the stream had actually captured from above. The surge, the compression, the barrier section, in the minutes before Taylor was pulled over. They turned it over to investigators without being asked. The recording was used to reconstruct the timeline of the surge and pinpoint when the barrier zone became critically dangerous. The cause of death came down to something most people would not think about. The crowd around her was packed so tightly that her chest could not expand enough to breathe. That kind of thing does not require a stampede or a panic. It just requires enough people packed tightly enough in one place. Smaller people have less body mass to push back against that kind of force, and that is part of why she went down when the people around her did not. Her mother identified her through the venue's post-incident documentation. The venue faced a formal safety review, and her family filed a civil case against the operator that took several years to reach a resolution. A crowd of thousands and the loneliest way to go, completely surrounded and completely invisible at the same time. Shifting to Colorado, where a young woman's casual Facebook Live walk through a grocery store turned into something else entirely when a shooter walked through the front entrance. It was February 6, 2018, inside a mid-sized suburban grocery store on the outskirts of a Colorado city. Wide aisles, fluorescent lighting, busy with people stopping in before work, and retirees doing their weekly shop. Aisle 7 ran parallel to the back wall stocking dry goods and canned products, long enough that someone at one end could not see the other. Two main entrance points, a rear receiving area, and that morning roughly 30 to 40 customers and 8 staff members spread across the floor. Holland Weil was 44 and had been a floor supervisor at that store for 9 years. He was the person his co-workers went to when something needed handling, not because it was in his job description, but because over 9 years people had just learned they could count on him. He had a wife and 3 kids at home. That Tuesday morning, he was doing his usual rounds when a man walked through the front entrance at 9:14 a.m. The woman who ended up with everything on her Facebook live stream was 26, a regular at that store, killing time on a slow Tuesday morning before heading into work late. She had been walking the aisles for about 10 minutes with her phone out, streaming casually to a bunch of followers. She was in the snack aisle, 2 aisles over from where it started, when the first shot went off at 9:17 a.m. The man who came in through the front entrance moved through the store without stopping or drawing any attention. He was carrying a concealed handgun. The store was quiet that morning, the PA running softly overhead, registers going in the background. Nobody looked up or noticed anything until the first shot went off. The first shot hit the woman's stream like a crack, cutting straight through the ambient noise of the store. She stopped mid-sentence. About 2 seconds passed, and then the store changed all at once. The PA cut out. Someone shouted from the direction of the back wall, and then more voices and the sound of people moving fast in every direction. She dropped low and moved toward the end of the aisle without ending the stream, stopping at the corner of the shelving unit with the phone at knee height. That took guts. Not everyone would have done that. The shooter moved through the store over the next 4 minutes and fired a total of 7 rounds. Most went into shelving and product. A customer near the frozen section was hit in the upper arm and survived. Holland was the second person struck. From the moment the first shot went off, Holland had been moving toward it. He was in the process of directing customers toward the rear receiving exit when he came around into the cross aisle between aisle 6 and aisle 7 and came face to face with the shooter. He was shot once in the chest at close range and went down in the cross aisle. The woman's stream caught it from the corner of aisle 7 about 15 feet away. The shot registered on the audio first, noticeably closer than the first one, and then Holland came into the bottom of the frame as he went down, visible from the knees down, face down on the floor of the cross aisle. He stayed down. She pulled back around the corner and stayed there, her breathing audible on the stream, the store almost completely silent around her. The shooter walked out through the main entrance and was taken into custody in the parking lot by a responding unit that was already arriving as he came out. She didn't move from that corner until she heard officers working through the store. A few minutes on that corner, not knowing if he was still in the building or if she was next. I cannot imagine. Holland was found in the cross aisle and transported immediately. The single gunshot wound to his chest had done enough internal damage that the time between the shooting and medical personnel reaching him was too long to overcome. He was pronounced dead at a treatment facility roughly 40 minutes after the shooting. The autopsy told a brutal story. The bullet had gone through his right lung and torn the pulmonary vein. Blood filled the chest cavity and the lung collapsed. That kind of injury is not survivable without immediate surgery, and there was no way to get him that in time. The shooter was charged with first-degree murder for Holland's death, along with multiple counts of attempted murder. He was convicted at trial and sentenced to life without parole. The woman provided her phone and the full stream recording to investigators voluntarily and cooperated throughout the process. Holland Weil left behind a wife and 3 children. He had worked those same aisles for 9 years, and the last thing he did in them was walk towards something everyone else was running from.